Hi everyone. Welcome to one of my first videos on the topic of value investing and kind of looking at a thesis for a stock that I've been looking at for a while. I wrote a blog post on Nintendo a couple months ago, and it's kind of just a collection of writings and insights I've had on Nintendo for a while, and kind of as its company as a value investment in the long term. So I expect a ton of disagreements in the comments because having an opinion on a stock even can be a little bit controversial and things like that. But I am always open to if you write a paragraph about something, I'm probably going to read it, and if you have cited sources or links, I try to everything I write use a cited source from somewhere. That's just good academic practice in general. And yeah, that's it. So I'm going to get started and kind of talk about this topic that I'm really excited about here. And I'm going to make myself a little bit smaller so I don't take up the whole screen. You have something to look at here. All right, there I go, flying around. Cool. So Nintendo as a value investment. So like I've said in other videos, I'm actually enrolled in a program for MBA with Penn State. So I'm in my in my spare time, I'll read things like the intelligent. Oh, it's not working. The Intelligent Investor. Reading my finance book, my textbook, and all other guys like Peter Lynch. And there's one thing Warren Buffett has said, and that is staying in your circle of competencies, right? Just stay with what you know with. Um, I used to try to invest in oil like FLNG and some energy stocks like that. But I've realized, oh, you know what? I don't really understand these industries as well as I think. So I actually took myself out of those investments. What I do know really well growing up was actually video games, believe it or not. I grew up on the PS2, the GameCube, and it never occurred to me a couple months ago that I could invest in Nintendo. There's a lot of controversial opinions. People really hate Nintendo. If you don't know that, you can like Google Nintendo did this, Nintendo did that, because of their intellectual property lawyers and kind of the lack of customer support, which I kind of see as a downside for the company. I really don't love that their customer support is not. They're not very good with interacting with the Western audience and kind of creating really cool moments with the modding community and what we call the emulator community, and that's a real shame. But this is a stock analysis investment, and a company's reality is very different from a consumer's reality, right? So yeah, so like why Nintendo, right? Um, you know, I think Nintendo has a really easy business model to understand. And Peter Lynch, I'm reading his like Beat the Wall Street book, and he said, if you can't describe it in a sentence or a few words, don't invest in it. He did this famous study or this case of having grade schoolers actually invest, and they outperformed some portfolio managers there that you can read about in his book and the study that he did. And it was really simple. People just kind of looked at like Coca-Cola, and they were just say, well, Coca-Cola, there's a reason why Warren Buffett's invested in that. Everyone knows it, and they have a massive moat, and they've are basically a huge conglomerate of owning water bottle services. So, you want to invest in things you understand very well and very deeply, and it's simply Mario, Pokemon, and the Switch right now. That's why you should invest in Nintendo. I actually believe Nintendo is slightly undervalued. You might want to do some safety of margins calculations and do a DCF, obviously. I want to make a video later to show how to do a DCF and with the WAC, which was a really cool technique I learned in the program, and you can learn online too. Trying to think about how to keep it to 10 minutes because I've seen some videos go on for an hour. I'm just like, well, just try to explain the concepts and try to keep it simple, which hopefully I'll be good at doing. But Nintendo has been kind of against the grain in terms of other companies. they haven't embraced what we call like the mobile trend. You can see companies like Blizzard and Activision try to move Diablo to the mobile, and that just didn't work. People were really upset. They were upset with the quality of the product, and Nintendo has only rarely done things like Pokemon Go and Mario Kart on the phone, but they haven't gone all out with their IP like that. They've sort of hedged, if that makes sense. They did a little bit, but they didn't do all of it, and that's okay because I think Nintendo probably knows that mobile is going to be a really saturated market. Their IP could do really well in that space, but I think they're really focused on the quality of user experience they give people. So another reason it's undervalued here, you want to invest in stocks, value stocks that are undervalued, right? Is that I think the average investor in the United States, portfolio managers, don't invest in Nintendo because it's a ADR, right? You have to purchase kind of over the counter ADRs, right? Correct me in the comments about that. And that means you have to pay a slight fee to trade on those stocks exchanges, right? And that's just kind of the price of getting access to owning a fraction of their stock. So one stock in Nintendo for NTDOY, right? That's a fraction of that stock, 1/8 of that stock, and that's just the price to pay for that. And that, of course, comes with the dividend. I think the reason it trades less is that people are just not really aware of Nintendo. I've talked with a few friends, and kind of like, hey, have you heard of Nintendo? Have you heard of the Switch? And they're like, what the hell is that? They're like, what is that? Oh, that thing I bought my kid? Yeah, what about it? And I'm like, do you know that their entire balance sheet has a load of cash and no debt? Like, and they're a global, phenomenon, but you only know a little bit about them because they live in your living room as like an entertainment system, right? But if you're a gamer and you're familiar with investing and you kind of understand the true business model of Nintendo and what they've really accomplished, which is great. And there's a lot of growth in the market potentially, right? Like the video game market has grown for years. There's like 190 million Americans who play video games. There's exposure to China, America, and Japan. I've recently read something about China though that Nintendo had some sort of situation they might pull out of China, which is unfortunate. I don't know anything deeper about that. I think that'll just have to be another video. Keeping up with the stock market can be a lot, and kind of reading all the articles and rumors about Switch 2 and things like that. Like I said, I wrote this 3 months ago. So, investing in Nintendo, there could be geopolitical risk, right? I don't think Taiwan is going to get invaded, but there is always that geopolitical risk, that potential that the invasion of Taiwan does happen, and that's really scary. And I think that would be the least of my problems at that time for everyone, obviously. But things like when war happens, inflation happens, and then increased interest rates, and this kind of screws up with the economy and things like that. But and even recently with the yen, this is another factor. The yen compared to the dollar, it's falling. That you can get so many yen for your dollars. There's been some rebound in that, but when you look deeper into Nintendo's 10F, 10Qs and stuff, you can see that overseas sales for Nintendo are actually 70%. That means 70% of Nintendo sales are outside of Japan, and they use that to their advantage. They get more purchasing power from the USD and the pound from the UK than they do in Japan. And that actually kind of inflates their numbers on the balance sheet and their cash flows because everything is in yen. So that's just something you have to think about. Nintendo is a really interesting investment because it's not like an average American company where everything is kind of straightforward and easy to understand there, but it's in this in-between world as this global, using factories overseas to create the Nintendo at a low cost price and selling abroad to other markets through software and hardware. So it's doing something really interesting that not a lot of other companies have kind of done outside of like Sony and car companies, right? Which It's kind of obvious for Japan and things like that. So, should you buy Nintendo for short-term trades? I think you should not. I think Nintendo is very it's a cyclical. It kind of is in cycles, right? Nintendo is cyclical. Speech impediments and things like that. It kind of it goes through kind of what if you look at a semiconductor market, it can be kind of up and down over the years. So recently, a couple months ago, Nintendo stock price dropped 12% compared to 2023. It's just a cyclical consumer stock. So be aware of that. You can trade on it if that is your strategy. If you do technical analysis, great, do it. But personally, I wouldn't do that. I think Nintendo has a lot of value and a lot of growth, and it's going to be moving out of this like cyclical consumer stock in the next few years. And I think a big part of it is just looking at this really simple histogram here, the simple graph from their PowerPoint presentations. So, the Switch is really old. It's been out for 7 years, but it still holds up. Like the Switch works. It's a durable product. It's actually a quality product. It's well made. It's just not something you buy and you get the new iPhone or whatever, right? It's just you actually buy it and you keep it for a long time. And the Switch and its software products have actually kept people growing that, user base. So here in 2018, they had 36 million users on the Switch. Okay, now they have 123 annual users playing on the Switch. Annually. They keep coming back. They keep playing the Switch. I'm still playing the Switch. I'm still playing games on the Switch, which is great. So there's some sort of software market, and they've created like the Nintendo Cloud, and they're kind of making a new monthly subscription, and they've seen a rise in like digital sales. So really, there's a lot of rumors about the Switch 2. I am not, investing in Nintendo because I'm waiting for the Switch 2. That's really short-sighted. I would say you need to look at Nintendo when a price drops again and say, this could be a really long-term trade or purchase, right? The long-term, you buy it and you hold it, hopefully, and earn value and dividends on that over time. So personally, I wouldn't short-term trade Nintendo. Even recently they had some fall in profits, and guess what? That's okay. It's not the end of the world. They have a really strong balance sheet, and they have no debt. Some will say since they're not leveraging debt, they're not using their assets efficiently to grow more like return on investment because Japanese companies are more conservative in nature. I think that's okay. Really, what's wrong with that? Warren Buffett recently invested into Mitsubishi and a lot of manufacturing companies, right? What is wrong with that? And I think you have to look for growth and value stocks outside of the United States. For the past couple months, there's been a lot of, I think, equities that are undervalued outside of the US because everyone is now exposed to the stock market. Everyone's investing in those equities. And it's really, that's great and everything. But, what can you do? So I do think the Switch 2 will be successful simply because Nintendo, out of Microsoft and Sony, they're making money on every Switch they've sold. Every Switch they sell, they're making a profit. Sony and Xbox don't make a profit on their hardware systems at all. They're actually making more money on software, right, through the cloud. And they've been longstanding competitors, and they used to call it the console wars and everything like that. But Nintendo has figured out a way to create a unique product at a very low cost compared to competitors and still make a profit on that. And that's really difficult to do. Having something different that's low cost to manufacture and make a product and make a profit on that, that's really hard to do. And that's what makes them have such a competitive moat that I'll get into. Right. So, what I do to do competitive analysis, I use something called Michael Porter's Competitive Five Forces. I recommend reading his competitive strategy books to get into deeper thinking about how companies, products, and industries compete with one another. There's always a SWOT analysis, but I feel as though SWOT analysis can be very high level, and they don't get into the details about revenue, product experience, customers, things like that. But I'm going to give you like a speed run, a competitive analysis of Nintendo here, right? So Nintendo is in this industry called the gaming console market. There's an intense rivalry in the US. So you have Sony's PlayStation 5, you have Xbox, and you have the Nintendo Switch. And the thing is that buyers fundamentally have a ton of buying power, right? You as a consumer have so many options. You can go to Steam, you can go to PC gaming on Steam to get those video gaming experiences. You can go to VR. You can buy old systems like, the GameCube. Google tried Stadia, didn't work out, but there's people trying to enter this market. Like the Steam Deck is really successful, and that's considered a competitive pressure. So your ability to buy something is a competitive pressure on that industry or product, right? So if there was only one gaming console, you have a really low competitive force or pressure on that industry, right? So, I would say buyers have the strongest competitive force in this industry, and that's why Nintendo always has to innovate and focus on unique experiences. Suppliers, on the other hand, have a low competitive pressure in this instance because there are many manufacturers of plastics. The plastic goes into the Switch, the semiconductor industry. Nintendo is not going to TCM. They're not going to Taiwan Semiconductor and NVIDIA to put an NVIDIA GPU in a Switch. They're really not. And guess what? That's okay. It works out for them. It works out for the customer because Nintendo has the lowest price point of $250, maybe $299 now with everything in inflation. They have a really competitive product at a low price point, and it's great for consumers who need an entry level gaming console. Because guess what? For some consumers, PC gaming can be really hard to get into. I built a PC for my partner, my wife, and she was very intimidated by that. And the average consumer in the US is intimidated by that, and they need people to build PC for them. And that's why you kind of see those businesses do that, right? So I would say the supply side is low in terms of pressure. Nintendo kind of has the pick of the litter because they're so big and they have so much cash and so much revenue. But they have a lot of pressure from the buyer because there's so many substitutes, right? I can get my Steam Deck, I can get my PC. Oh, I can go watch Netflix with my limited time. And that's why you only see Xbox, Sony, and the Switch really do that. Now, I have to retake these screenshots because they're just so JPEG'd and screwed up. But that's another problem for another day. And I just kind of go over what I said in text here. Yeah, and Nintendo just, like I said already, they have it, right? So if we look at some more concepts and apply them to Sony and Nintendo essentially, the concepts described before, they have a competitive advantage because they innovated to differentiate and they have the overall cost leadership. Usually you can only be different or you can only have the lowest cost product. Nintendo magically has somehow, they're different and they're really cheap compared to the competitors, which is crazy. Mario Kart is the experience I can only get at Nintendo, right? I cannot get that anywhere else. That is a unique experience. You could try other racing games, but it won't feel the same. It won't be exciting. It won't be as fun playing with 4 people in your room, So I think that kind of plays into that competitive advantage for them, and that's why they have that competitive moat. And they're really all over their IP. They protect their IP. They haven't done what Sony and Xbox has done. So Xbox sold themselves out. You used to have exclusives like 10 years ago or more of Halo and stuff like that, but they sold that out and you can play Halo on PC. Now, I think I have some opinions on that, and it has created a lot of money for Xbox. But in a sense, they're just selling software, right? You're just selling video games at a large volume to make that revenue. But they're not making any money on the Xbox anymore. No one is. And Xbox sales have actually suffered in comparison to Sony. Sony, I think, has doubled down, and they're trying to make a competitor to the Switch now because they see how successful it's been. And I really do think they might go back to exclusive titles, but they haven't either because, they licensed God of War to be played on Steam, and you can buy God of War and play God of War on the Steam platform, which is really cool. But Nintendo hasn't done that. I can't play Mario on Steam. And I don't think they're going to do that for a very long time because this is their competitive advantage, right? Giving that up, they'll lose everything. They won't be able to make more Mario if they give that up, basically. So I think Sony has done things like the DualSense controllers, and they vibrate in your hand and they make voices, things like that, to be give them a feature a little bit. And they've also acquired Crunchyroll, which is another competitive advantage, is that they're becoming this conglomerate of media, music, and streaming and video games, and they want PS5 to become the ultimate entertainment system, and they really want to push Nintendo out of that because they want to own that, right? They want to monopolize that. So, Xbox has acquired other companies like Bungie, and now they're like 343 Industries, and there's this potential with AI to improve these gaming experiences, and you can kind of like watch videos of playing like ChatGPT AI voices in Skyrim, which is really cool, but they haven't put that in the software yet. And I think that's because the AAA industry with games are so bloated, with $1 million projects, and they haven't really explored concepts that are fun. Nintendo, I think, I'm going to get into the next part is like their innovation strategy, which is really cool and unique if you've ever looked at any of Nintendo's game development projects or research teams. But before I go on, I just want to show you this chart from VGCharts.com. Here you can see the number of sales the Xbox Series has made, and it's fallen behind completely by millions of units. You have Sony and Nintendo making 16 million units now selling, right, on those weekly launch sales and everything. And Xbox, not so much. It's I think Xbox has lost the competitive advantage because they were in this benchmarking race. It's a race to the bottom. Sony and Xbox were in this intense race to really own the gaming console market, and it's all about the new GPU. It's all about the most expensive processing possible, and it's expensive to manufacture that. And they lost out, and Sony just came out on top by, I think, honestly, how Microsoft kind of manages Xbox versus Sony. Sony has put everything on the PS5. They've really put all their chips on that. Now, their games are a different story. If you've heard of Concord, they wasted like $300 million on that game, and complete flop. No one played it. And that's a real shame. And I think Sony is going to change how they develop games now and really just look at gaming studios that are successful before piling money into projects, because you could pile all the money into one project and it's all this risk and it doesn't work out. And Nintendo, they went in a completely different direction. The Wii U was a complete failure. Everyone knows that. It's not really news, and I don't hold it against Nintendo. But that led them to innovating to the Switch. And the Switch is a really accessible platform. And that's the thing with like Nintendo's strategy, is that Nintendo has had over 135 years. It's such an old company. They originally were creating what's called Hanafuda cards, which are cards of flowers on them, and it was a way to kind of gamble and play cards in Japan at the time. They're a really old company. They've been around for a very long time. They're practically an institution at that point, right? And they have this $72 billion market cap for software and hardware games. But Nintendo is the highest spender of R&D on average than most companies in this area. And they've spent about 12.54% of its revenue on R&D alone. And it's increased over the years from 2017 here on the right to the left. It's like backwards if you read left to right. But here you can see Nintendo has completely increased its ability to do research and R&D, and they've created these unique development departments where they're taking older IP and then kind of prototyping until something is fun. So that's how Splatoon happened, is that they kind of have teams and people design different games and levels and mechanisms and play something out that's fun, and then they can reuse the IP on top of those mechanisms, like Mario's recent game, like Brothers with Luigi and Mario. They didn't start with Mario assets. They started with what they had, and in a very like wireframe way found some very fun mechanics to play around with, and then they kind of put stuff on top, it seems like. And doing that in where you have kind of a prototyping, everyone prototypes, and then you kind of show everyone what is the most fun, that reduces a ton of risk. Because if you pour all your money into Concord for $300 million onto one bet, that's really bad. And Nintendo has figured that out, is that they have a quality IP. They're really good at creating a fun system, this culture of creating a fun game. And, they kind of have this whole innovative culture in their history where originally the Japanese government back in the 1800s banned playing cards, like, with the numbers, spades, diamonds, completely banned. And Hanafuda cards were a way to get around that. And then if you get into the 1950s, Nintendo tried to go in a lot of different directions with their CEO, Hishiro Yada. I'm butchering that completely. I'm so sorry. They realized that the cards that they were manufacturing were failing, right? So they tried to get into taxi services, love hotels, instant rice. They did a collaboration with Disney, believe it or not. They had these Disney playing cards, vacuum cleaner. It didn't work out, but their leadership recognized a lower level maintenance assembly line man, Gun Piyoko. Wow, I'm so sorry. I wish I could pronounce that better. He created this mechanical extended arm, right? And he was just kind of playing around with it. And, the boss basically saw him, and that became their first successful toy product. And they ended up promoting him, because why wouldn't you want to promote somebody who just made a successful product and it became Ultra Hand, or a huge success there, right? This guy created a new philosophy in engineering known as lateral engineering. So what they do at Nintendo is that they look at, it's called lateral thinking. You look at old technology and you reuse that well-developed, well-documented technology in new products. So, you don't want to do what Xbox did, right? You don't want to do what Sony did, is that they bought the latest hardware in GPUs and semiconductors, and they put that into the PlayStation, right? You want to look at the semiconductors from a few years ago, because those semiconductors are very cheap. Because if you think about Moore's Law is constantly pushing what we could do with the semiconductor industry and creating new GPUs and new CPUs, very powerful semiconductor chips. But what about all the chips that were manufactured before that? Guess what? They're really cheap. And with lateral thinking, Nintendo buys those cheaper alternatives, secondary manufacturers of chips, and that led to the Nintendo Switch being made, because it's so much cheaper to buy these chips. They're not the cutting edge, but they're still there, kind of in cars or in TVs, and they're just, there's so many of them. The supply is cheap. So lateral thinking is a philosophy that kind of started from the 50s to the 80s that really helped Nintendo harness technology that was cheap to buy, but then creatively, manufactured in a way that was successful. So, that's kind of their principal philosophy, is fun comes first. So whatever Nintendo is making, that game, that console needs to be fun, obviously, right? Otherwise, no one's going to buy it. So in the 70s, they finally got into video game arcades. They finally got there, and they've also done innovative things like create, basically a free hands controller. It's a kind of accessible product. It was a way for people with disabilities to play video games. Nintendo was the first ones to do that, and accessibility is built into their systems, right? Like you use Nintendo, it's very easy to use. It's easy for anyone to pick up. I bet there's some controversy there because they might not be as much as that they are now, but they were kind of the first ones to do that there, and they've created a quality of life for the product for the user, and they kind of have that user centric design philosophy of easy to pick up, easy to use. You don't have to be so technologically, like I'll play a game on Steam and it breaks and I have to go find an obscure patch to fix it just to play my game. No one wants to do that, right? So, um, and then this philosophy, I really like this story, is that that engineer. Okay, hold on. We're going to go ahead and just get a pronunciation. Get a.
横井軍平。
Yokoi. Okay, Yokoi. All right, so Yokoi, that engineer I brought up earlier, he was watching a bored businessman on the subway. He was going on a train or a subway in Japan, and he was watching a guy mashing buttons on his calculator. And in that moment, watching the guy play on his calculator, he realized he can use existing semiconductor parts, right? And kind of that kind of screen you have there, I forgot what it was called. And he built the first Game and Watch. So from watching a guy bored on his calculator, he realized he could make a portable gaming system in that moment. Through observation, he has innovated. And that's how a lot of people innovate on products, is that by watching other people, you can learn their behaviors and what they're doing in their life and kind of innovate and provide a product in that moment. And that product, Game and Watch, later became the Game Boy. So this is sort of like built into their innovative culture, and I think that's why they have a competitive advantage. They can creatively take really, really, not the most advanced semiconductor technology in the world, but then build a unique product from those supplies and create a unique user experience. And then through software, they can kind of optimize over time, things like that. So, for a hardcore gamer, it's not the best, but for the average Joe, it's a really cheap and accessible point of entry at $250, right? So, and then finally, customer touch points, like Nintendo for years used to have the E3 event, and that was a big announcement. And they've actually, E3 has kind of died, but they made such a huge effort in America and the West to demonstrate innovative products. They had a cardboard product, for example, a few years ago, really out there, and it didn't blow up or anything, but they experiment, right? And they've always projected an image of a company that is innovating, trying new things for users, and staying relevant and competitive in the market and keeping users excited. And I think they've realized basically who they are and what they have to offer the world, and then they're expanding their moat through, like, the recent Mario movie and theme park, I think, in California there. And now they kind of have their own Nintendo Direct every year, their own kind of way to communicate with everyone publicly about new releases, and that's something everyone gets excited about every year. So yeah, I think that's about it. I think, really what's next with Nintendo is that, Nintendo is going to develop the Switch. There was rumors about it being developed. There's still a ton of leaks and rumors. Their CEO recently has stated that they're constantly doing R&D, but I don't think they were really planning on it. He kept quiet about it. Didn't really hint at anything, but they have pushed Nintendo to movies, mobile apps, and theme parks. So there's some growth there. They're very protective of their IP, and has a great moat, and it's easy to understand what they're offering people. I think there's a lot more we can see from the Switch and its ecosystem. I think there's tons of improvements they could make, but improvements just could mean growth. Overall, I think if you're seeing Nintendo's current stock price, let's go look. Nintendo. Yep. It's around 13.99 US dollars. Years ago, I invested back when it was around $10 here. Um, there's always that risk with investing. If it goes down, I'm okay with that. I think that's just another opportunity to buy more of Nintendo. Um, Compared to so many other stocks, they can be really overvaluated. Just looking at Take Two Interactive, they're really excited for future releases there. Um, but in general, I would either wait for a point of entry, or slowly, just invest over time, like do a little bit every year, and kind of play with it. But you want to understand the company you're investing in really well, and you want to do as much research as possible about the company. I think Nintendo's a really low risk company, but what that means is that you're not going to see crazy growth. You're not going to see like 10xing like Rocket Labs or something, right? You're not going to see that here. So I do see this as a value investment in, or you could even say growth maybe. But like I said, its PE is really low compared to everyone else there. They're cash ready for honestly mergers and acquisitions. I think there's a lot more they can buy out. Great IP. Honestly, from a business perspective, what you can learn is if you're developing video games, designed for fun, you need to ask people, is your game fun? You need to iterate a lot on that. Collaborate between departments internationally. That's something Nintendo did really well. Seek out potential and employees, promote them, direct them for a new opportunity, right? If you see somebody who did something really great, you could promote them. Give small teams a chance to experiment. They're experimenting like crazy. If you have budget and resources to experiment, do that and kind of, you know, capitalize on that. And, Nintendo, I think, has realized its IP is so powerful, it's going beyond just video games in this platform. But there's a lot of competition. Recently, Sony is trying to develop its own handheld portable console. I think they're going to realize how difficult that is because, offering the most powerful handheld console ever in the world with, let's say, the PS5 or like charging it, there's all those user experience issues they'll have because Nintendo, you can just kind of put your Switch in there and it charges. You can pick it up. It's mobile, great battery life. You know, um, Otherwise, I think it's a great value investment. You can check out my works cited here in the blog article. I'll leave that in the description. So, hey, thank you so much for listening to me. I hope this was interesting and exciting for you. I'll be looking at more companies, doing more research in the future. So, thank you for your time.